I'm Antonia Prebble, and this is Being Human, a series where I investigate some fundamental elements of the human condition, elements that we can all relate to, in order to try and get a better understanding of what we do and why. I chat to some people I know about their experiences, and you might recognise them too, and I also talk to experts who explain what's going on at a deeper level and who also offer some practical advice that we can incorporate into our lives. I hope you find it useful. First question, do you like food?
So I think fundamentally I love food. I call myself a foodie, and in the sense that I love the culture around that we now have, in a privileged world around dining and what we can do with food. But the fundamental part of that equation I have had, I guess a very roller coaster relationship with for most of my life. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was like 12, which is an inflammatory bowel disorder, but it wasn't until I was about 20 years old that I was hospitalised with the illness. And it wasn't until then that I actually started to kind of care about my longevity and my diet and my health and the rest of it, so I started to make changes. And that's probably when I started to educate myself around food.
And what's in it too.
Yeah.
I used to just go to the supermarket and buy stuff that I liked. But when I actually found out that my family were allergic to gluten and dairy and seafood and a bunch of other things, I walk into the supermarket. I need my glasses to make sure I can read everything.
Yeah.
But also,
now it's a long time. You take a long time in those places now.
And you start to understand. You start to think about what's behind the label and what's behind the food, which I didn't used to do. Right. And my wife had a very similar thing actually. And so we had to understand what was dairy-free, what was gluten-free, and then start to shape our lives around that.
Do you feel when you have to say, go to a restaurant, is this gluten-free, is this dairy-free, do you feel like you're being difficult, or do you feel justified in that decision? What's the reaction that you get? Well, it has changed over the last 10 to 20 years. When we first were doing this 15 years ago, you'd go to a restaurant and then you'd have to ask, what's gluten-free, what's dairy-free. Now, most menus have the little symbols for gluten and dairy-free. And overseas, and I really noticed this in Australia and the UK, they're really big on saying what's vegan. So there's a lot of vegan meals and a lot more focus on meat-free.
Yeah, and I think that also comes into the restaurant industry and the food industry itself. Like, they seem to be taking more responsibility for it now. It used to kind of be, and there still is, if you want to dine at my restaurant, then you eat my food. That's what I'm providing. And now it's kind of like, in order for that industry to survive, they're starting to care about food sourcing and what's in it, and they don't want to alienate customers.
We're also starting to realise that food is used as a way to influence us, to sell to us, to extract money from us, and to play on our weaknesses, essentially. And the way I look at this is to think about service stations. So I'm 52, so I'm a little bit old in terms of, I remember what you could buy in the 80s and what shops were like and what you'd experience when you go into a service station. And I actually worked in a service station as a teenager. We used to sell oil and jumper leads and screwdrivers and all the things you'd get now from a Repco or a warehouse or whatever. Now when you walk into a service station, you are confronted with a wall of sugar and lots of colourful sugar. And this is the thing I find fascinating about food, how companies, multinational companies, have used our food weaknesses, our impulsiveness, our willingness to go for sugar, and weaponized it to essentially deliver us these incredibly high energy, high nastiness foods.
Yeah, and it plays into the need, the fundamental thing where they've played into we're living fast, and if you've got a job where you've only got 30 seconds to run into that service station to get your sustenance for the day, you grab for the sugary muesli bar and the energy drink that's right there because it's going to give you what you need to get through. But
but it doesn't.
No, it's a lie.
Can you, in your own life, identify the difference between a hunger and having a craving?
No, and I'm extra aware of this because 10 years ago, I had what they call bariatric surgery, which is essentially as a stomach stapling. This is because I got very heavy, so 130, 140 kilograms, because I found it really difficult to stop eating and to avoid, the supermarket aisle and the snacks and the cookies. And I felt it gave me some pleasure or some sort of, I just had to have it. I became aware that I was living in this obesogenic society. Now that doesn't excuse, me from buying things that I shouldn't have bought, but I found it was just impossible to avoid putting on weight. And so I had this bariatric surgery, which meant that I couldn't eat a lot and I couldn't eat a lot of sugar. They actually create a whole new stomach. It's a small pouch and reroute essentially your insides so that you don't digest a lot of stuff. And also it means that you cannot absorb things. So you can't, and also you can't eat much. So I'm one of these people now who spends an hour and a half on a meal. It forced me to think about food as an impulse. Food as a part of my environment that I needed to control. And I went through that process. It means that I can still enjoy some food and I have to be careful about what I eat, but I've managed to find a way so that I'm not putting on weight and that I'm probably going to live a bit longer.
I was going to say, it's so interesting that it's surgery, or in my changing relationship with food and health was illness. Prior to the hospitalisation, I had lost a lot of weight. I wasn't eating because every time I ate, you had crippling, cramping, internal pain. Again, your body, your digestive tract stops absorbing any nutrients. So I got anemic, and so everything's going downhill. And I also, because of that, lost a lot of weight, but I associated the weight loss to pain and to bad times.
Yeah, so you've been in the public eye under, somewhat of a microscope for most of your life. How did that affect your relationship with food and therefore your relationship to yourself?
I think my relationship with my image was deeply affected by it, in the sense that you just, your criticism levels are just off the chart. And I think, again, it's all about comparison. And you're constantly, I was working, on screen alongside, when I was that sort of age, a lot with Ange Bloomfield, who, if we stood next, she's tiny, she's a dear friend of mine, but you can't compare me, who's, 5'8", to her who's not.
But you would.
Our bodies, but I did. And so interestingly now, 20 years later, I look back at some of that stuff and go, oh my God, I was really slender and tall and I'm curvy, and I look at all the positives, but I didn't see them at the time. And I think that's one of the biggest, hurdles and things that I think needs to shift.
Why is nutrition and food such an issue in Western countries?
We've got to think back thousands of years to how man was evolving, Homo sapiens, and how it took hundreds of thousands of years for us to develop. So going from foraging for berries and nuts to eating more animal products, because we developed weapons to be able to hunt properly. And then if you think back just to the last 100 years, there has been an absolute explosion in terms of food technology. We've suddenly have intensive farming, we have antibiotics being used in farming, food is produced in factories a lot of the time, food preservatives are being used, so there's just been a huge shift in the type of food that we're eating. And I really feel that people's bodies are almost fighting back, that we can't keep up with the pace, because we are still living technically in those cavemen and women's bodies. Genetically, we haven't moved on as fast as the type of food that we're eating has moved on. And this is creating a lot of the problems.
Even if you're an appropriate weight for your size, it doesn't mean you're healthy, does it?
No, there is no one size fits all when it comes to diet. Even eating healthy foods can be detrimental to some people's health. If you have digestive issues, for example, if you have an overgrowth of yeast or bacteria or parasites, I find are increasingly common, particularly in New Zealand. And for those kind of people who have those infections, even eating healthy, fibre-rich foods can be problematic. So temporarily you have to take those out of the diet, sort out the underlying problems, and then reintroduce them.
the paleo diet, the keto diet, and also fasting. Just wondering if you could talk a bit about those three in particular. Sure. And what your opinion is, what the actual evidence is to support these very popular eating trends.
Sure. I think in terms of evidence, there is a lot of evidence behind all of them, and they have been introduced by scientists. There is backing to it, but like any of these, it comes down to individual preference, and some people will absolutely thrive on those kind of diets and others won't. It depends on underlying health issues, so it's worth checking those out to start with, going to a doctor, going to a nutritionist and asking for some of these tests to actually see if they do have symptoms, just actually see what the underlying cause of those symptoms are, and then tailoring a diet accordingly.
Is there something that you wish people would know? Is there one sort of element of information that either frustrates you because you see it's wrong, or it's just there's an omission with that particular bit of information out there? What is something you wish people would know?
That it doesn't have to be difficult. It just, the same messages come through whether you're thinking about liver problems or hormone problems. It's just keeping your diet clean and simple. It's sort of half a plate of vegetables, non-starchy, green, leafy vegetables. I'm always telling people to eat their greens. Getting the beneficial fats into the diet, including some kind of fibre. Be adventurous with food, prioritise food.
So keeping it simple, but with a sense of adventure and bringing things back to basics. That sounds like some very good practical advice for an approach to healthy eating.
Absolutely.